Good evening and welcome to the Development Management Committee. I'm Councillor Kieran Bowker, the chairman of this committee. Before we start the meeting, I need to make the public attending aware of the following. We're not expecting a fire drill, so if the fire alarm sounds, please make your way out of the nearest emergency exit and gather at the front of Runnymede Hall. Meetings of this committee are webcast and broadcast on the internet. If you're seated in the public area of the council chamber, it's possible that your image will become part of the broadcast. And might I lastly ask all present to switch mobile phones to silent. May I ask the Development Management Committee members present who are seated in the front row of me to introduce themselves, stating your name only and starting on the left.
Good evening, my name is Councillor Peter Craig, Vice Chairman.
Good evening, Councillor Alan Aycott.
Good evening, Councillor Carol Sate.
Good evening, name only, Councillor John Anderson.
Good evening, Councillor Rob Lillis.
Good evening, Councillor Gareth Howlett.
Good evening, Councillor Hannah Barton-Brown.
Good evening, Councillor Jackie Thornton.
And Councillor Tom Skip.
May I ask the officers present to introduce themselves, again starting on my left.
Keith Zammit, Planning Officer.
Good evening, Stephen Garner, Planning Manager.
Cheryl Salmon, and I'll be taking the minutes of the meeting.
Jason Bishop, Legal Advisor to the committee.
May I ask any other members present and the Canvey Island Town Council representatives to introduce themselves.
Councillor Russ Savage from St Mary's Ward.
Councillor Michael Dearson from St Peter's Ward.
Councillor Clive Walter, St George's Ward.
Councillor Andrew Thornton for Boyce Ward.
Thank you very much. The first item on the agenda is apologies. Are there any apologies for absence?
I've received no apologies, Chairman.
The second agenda item is members' interests. Before I ask for members' interest, I would like to make a personal declaration with reference to agenda item 5.1. I wish to say and declare that although I know Councillor Bizzell through membership of my party, this association is not so as to affect any judgment of this matter, and I will be making my decision based upon the contents of the officer's report and after listening to and considering all of the views as expressed during the committee. Thank you. Are there any members' interests? Councillor Lillis.
Thank you, Chair. I also wish to make a personal declaration under 5.1. I wish to declare that although I know Councillor Bizzell through membership of my party, this association is not so as to affect my judgment of the matter, and I will be making my decision based upon the content of the report after listening and considering all of the views as expressed during this committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lillis. Are there any other members' interests? Councillor Howlett.
I also wish to say that although I know Councillor Bizzell through the membership of my party, this association is not so as to affect my judgment of the matter, and I will be making my decision based upon the content of the report and after listening and considering all of the views as expressed during the committee.
Thank you. Councillor Barton-Brown.
I wish to declare that although I know Councillor Bizzell through membership of my party, this association is not so as to affect my judgment of the matter, and I'll be making my decision based upon the content of the report after listening and considering all of the views as expressed during the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Are there any other members' interests? Thank you. Agenda item 3, minutes. Are the minutes of the Development Management Committee meeting held on the 4th of April 2023 agreed? Thank you. Item 4, public speakers. Are there any public speakers? Cheryl?
Chairman, yes, Councillor Andrew Thornton, who's the ward member, would like to speak after on agenda item 5.1, and then on agenda item 5.2, Mr Downs has requested to speak.
Item 5 is deposited plans. Before I move on to the first item, I would like to remind everyone the purpose of this committee is to consider all of the planning issues and merits of each application put forward in the planning officer's recommendations and then make a decision based upon sound planning reasons. It is the job of the officers to put forward a recommendation based upon their own independent professional expertise, judgment and code of conduct, which should be used to inform the committee in their decision-making function. Decisions can at times be controversial, which may result in members taking a different view to that put forward in the recommendation. It is acceptable to disagree with the officer's recommendations. However, this should be based upon clear material planning grounds which can be fully and appropriately justified. I will now hand over to the planning officer to present the first item.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Right, 36 Mount Road, proposal to rebuild an existing dwelling suffering from structural problems. The property is a detached property on the east side of Mount Road. We've gone to the photograph, backing onto woodland, surrounded on either side by other dwellings. Currently laid out with some off-street parking to the front, vehicle access, already got a hard surfaced frontage. This is the property we're looking at here with the dormers. Got a similar size and scale property on its sort of uphill side, if you like. Slightly down the hill, we've got another chalet-style property, which is this one here, which again also has off-street parking. At the rears of the properties, you can see that the house neighbour on this side's had an extension. This is the back of the application house. And again, this is the application house, the back. The neighbour to the north, sort of up the hill, if you like, is over here. And it's a bit of a quirky property in that it's split over 4 levels. Sort of street level here, and then there's like a lower ground, and then 2 more floors, sort of staggered. The rebuilding proposal is seeking to not have these changes in floor levels within the house. The floors would just be straight through, so ground first, and then sort of a lower ground floor at the rear. Again, you can see with parking to the frontage, sort of slightly sloping away from the street. That's the existing front of the house, as we see it in the back. If we flick over to the proposed, there's not a huge amount of difference between the two. As far as the street goes, the provision of a bigger dormer is really the main change. The architect has tried to keep the general scale and form of it in line with the neighbour next door, number 38. You can see it's a little bit taller. Currently, the application house sits slightly below 38. The proposal puts it slightly above. In officer's view, that's not something significant, but it's worth noting nonetheless. The side view, this red dash is what's there now, and that's the proposal. So it really is the side profile of the house where things are a bit different. It is slightly bulkier, does go slightly further back. I think they're sort of going over the existing conservatory at the back of the house. But given that they observe things like 45-degree lines from the neighbours' windows and that kind of thing, it's not something we feel would be a reason to turn it down on. I appreciate the room names are too small to read, but that's the existing floor layout, which looks a bit strange because it's got 4 floors because of the splitting. The new layout would be a more conventional floor layout. This little green bit here, in case you were wondering, that is actually a flat roof with a green roof on it. The architect has cut the first floor away a bit on this side just to lessen the impact on the neighbour's house. So I think really there's not really a lot more I've got to say to you on that point. There's a recommendation on page 5, which is that the application be approved. And I think that's all I've got for you at the moment, Chairman.
Thank you very much. We have a speaker. Councillor Thornton.
Thank you, Chair. As Ward Councillor, the reason for taking this opportunity is that I've been contacted by concerned residents in the immediate area of this application. I am aware that there is a civil boundary dispute with the neighbour, which is at this time, I believe, not resolved. And I'm also aware that the current property, 36 Mount Road, conflicts with the council's own residential design guidance, as mentioned on page 3 of this evening's agenda. As of the 1st of January 2013, the 2012 residential design guidance was adopted as a supplementary planning document to the Castle Point Borough Council's adopted local plan, and we are told that this is to be considered when making decisions on planning applications for all forms of residential development. The guidance contained in the supplementary planning document has the objective of ensuring that all new development in Castle Point conforms to an agreed adopted standard going forward. Yet in this instance, the officers appear to be advising to relax this guidance and not give it the weight that it deserves. This is even though the officer's own report states that the northern side boundary is not considered to be in keeping with the area as defined in its own adopted supplementary residential design guidance. What I don't understand is if this was an extension or even a partial rebuild, there may be an argument for mitigating circumstances requiring compromise, such as provided by the officer's recommendation, but it isn't. The officer's report states that this application is for a replacement property to the one that already in existence, and therefore it represents a completely new building, and this represents a council with the opportunity to ensure that its own adopted residential design guidance is implemented to this and to ensure that new buildings in the borough adhere to the policies agreed to it by its own council. I don't understand why our own council's residential guidance does not have to be adhered to in its entirety, the same as it was if this was a new building on cleared brownfield site. After all, I assume if the issue was around appropriate building materials or fire retardant policies, we wouldn't be arguing that it's better than it was. If we continue to water down our own adopted standards, as repeatedly seen in new development parking policies, it sets a precedent that we will influence other decisions going forward and ultimately the standard of development in the borough. The public perception of this application is also concerning. The neighbour of the application received documents back in March advising work will be soon starting on the footings, raising questions about the owner's premature confidence. With a councillor involved, there is likely to be a public scrutiny, and we should therefore not only be following the residential design guidance to the letter, but also be seen by the public to be doing so. Otherwise, we undermine our ability to impose this on the rest of the borough. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Thornton. Would you like to respond to any of that, Keith?
Oh, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Thornton, for your points. I wouldn't disagree with you, to be honest, on the point you raised about the flank wall being on the boundary. That's something that I've thought about myself. That a new building, it would be nice if we had something that complied fully with our residential design guidance. But then I said to myself, well, if the council was to refuse, if I was to recommend refusal and the council refused permission for it being 0.1 or 0.2 metres from the boundary, and the applicant goes to appeal, the planning inspector is going to come along and say, what are you talking about? It's on the boundary now. This is no worse. So, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It's, you know, it would be nice if it, if it was in full compliance, but under the circumstances and given that we're supposed to be flexible in how we apply the guidance, that's why the recommendations are an approval recommendation.
Thank you, Keith. Are there any other speakers? No. Before I move the recommendation, do members have any questions for the planning officer about the planning application? Please note that this is the member's opportunity to seek clarification from the planning officer on any matters they are unclear of regarding the application. Members should refrain from making statements about their views on the proposal, as these should be expressed in the debate section of the meeting. Are there any questions? Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. Just one quick question. Regarding condition 4, which states that any windows in the side elevation should be obscure glazed. I note that in the report proper, you actually state that side windows and all floors is the terminology that you use. I just wonder whether they should be aligned to one another. So condition 4 says any windows in the side elevation shall be, but in the main body of the report it states side windows and all floors. It's just whether or not you want to align the wording to one another.
Any windows inside?
Thank you.
So are you saying that one of them is only referring to some floors?
I'm just questioning whether you want to actually have the alignment between the wording in the main report and in the condition that you impose at the end of the document. So basically, should the words all floors be added to the condition like that used in the report on page 4?
Well, it says any side windows at the moment, which I think means windows on any floor. So as far as it being enforceable, should we need to, I don't see there being an issue there.
Councillor Jackie Thornton.
Yes, thank you. In the report, under impact on neighbours, it refers to oblique views are not protected. What does that mean exactly, please?
When we're looking at like overlooking adjoining gardens, the fact that you can stand at an upper window and see into the neighbour's garden at a sort of a diagonally, that's what we don't protect, because that happens anywhere you get development with more than a single story. So we'd be refusing all new houses and only allowing bungalows if we said diagonal views are unacceptable. It's windows directly facing the boundary, like windows in the side wall or windows in the rear wall where there's a short garden. That's what we seek to place our sort of main focus on.
It goes on to say they are secondary.
Windows that aren't primary windows to the accommodation. So secondary windows would be bathroom, ensuite, utility room, or a window in a bedroom where it's got its main window facing the front or the rear, might have a secondary window on the side.
If this application was not for a completely new building, has the property already achieved its permitted development?
Well, it's been extended already, so the scope for what they could do as permitted development is probably quite limited. But, I mean, it's had something on the rear, I think it's had roof works, so, yeah, there's probably not too much more they can do. Although, of course, outbuildings in the garden's another matter, and there's quite generous permitted development rights for outbuildings.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Skipp.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Now, I note your comments, Mrs. Emmett, about the existing building and the new building being very similar to, on that boundary. But we've made a big score about setting precedents previously on new builds, which is in effect a new build, and I think should be treated as such. And I'm concerned that if we allow this to go through now, how would that be setting a precedent if we try to make a similar decision on another property at a later date?
Yes, thank you for the point. That's certainly something I wouldn't disagree with. As for setting a precedent, it's a bit of an odd situation, this one. Now, if I just whiz back to here, I'm told that how this property came to be on the boundary was that these were semi-detached properties, 36 and 38, at one point in time. 38 had to be rebuilt due to structural issues, and when they rebuilt, they came off the boundary. which left number 36 on the boundary as it is now. So that's not a set of circumstances that I think is capable of being repeated incredibly frequently around the district. So whilst it could occur again, I'm not too worried that we're setting a precedent here, notwithstanding my earlier comments that, you know, it's not ideal.
Councillor Thornton?
Would the precedent wouldn't be on the fact it was on the boundary, though? The precedent would be set on the distance, that we're breaking the distance that is in our guidance between the two properties, or between any two properties.
Yes, you're quite right. I mean, all I was trying to say was you don't often get the circumstances where people have demolished half a semi-detached house. So that's perhaps something that sets it apart. But so that you don't tend to get this occurring too often in my experience.
When the number 38 was rebuilt, was the condition that it had to be set back, or how did that come to be set back from the boundary as opposed to just rebuilt as is?
I don't know how that came to be. Maybe there was discussions between the two owners at the time. I don't know, but that's just where we are. Number 38 came off the boundary when they rebuilt. We can't. There's no planning reason why we have to force number 36 to come off the boundary, in my opinion. But if as members you want to take a different view on that and you feel it's a lot more important than I'm saying it is, then you can perhaps put more weight on that when you're taking your decision.
Councillor Barton-Brown.
One of the comments in objection from the neighbour was in relation to the parking area being obtrusive to the neighbouring bedroom window. But on the comments following the consultation, it says that amended plans have been received to address the inconsistencies in the size of the parking area to now ensure an adequate depth. Is that in relation to fixing the issue of overlooking into the neighbour's bedroom window? Are they linked?
This front parking area, there is, let's flick over to here. There's parking there at the moment, which is raised. So this is an existing situation to some extent. There is also boundary vegetation here, which is under the control of that neighbour and they can retain it. I visited the application house and to have a look at this because it was a point that had come up. I didn't feel that there was strong grounds for us to be recommending refusal as officers because you've got boundary treatments here that do provide a degree of screening. But it is a subjective issue, which you can come to a different conclusion on. My professional recommendation is that wouldn't stand up to challenge if you were to say no. I think a planning inspector, if they appealed, would come along and say, well, there's screening there and it's already an existing situation. But that's just my advice to you.
Thank you very much. The planning officer's recommendation is that planning permission is granted subject to the conditions set out in the report before you. For the purposes of debate, I move the recommendation. Who would like to speak first? Councillor Thornton.
Yes, I mean it's a horrific thing when you suffer subsidence in your house, as I know to my own cost. But this does represent, if you're going to do a complete rebuild, it does represent an opportunity to make something better than it was, and also for the council to make sure that all guidance is adhered to. And I think you've got the higher scale of the roof, you've got the excessive shadowing, you've got the bedroom window and parking, and also some refuse. And I think the cumulative effect because we keep chipping away at, well, yes, but that bit's okay, but that bit's okay. We can allow that because of this. But if you look at them in their cumulative effect, I think it represents enough of a material planning reason not to actually approve this. And you mention that if it went to appeal, it would be upheld. But we don't know that, as we can see from appeals. So we can't make that judgment here that, well, okay, we've got to go that way because if we refused it, it would win at appeal. We've just got to look at the overall picture. And I think that, yes, you know, you can build a new house, but it needs to be done according to the guidelines and the supplementary planning document that the council has adopted, and not by chipping away at all the different conditions that were in that document.
Thank you, Councillor Thornton. Would anyone else like to speak? Okay. Members, the motion before you is for approval. May I have a show of hands, please? Those for the motion.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Chairman, 4.
Those against the motion?
1, 2.
So there are no abstentions. The motion, the planning is approved. Item 5.2, I will now hand over to the officers for their presentation.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This item is something a little bit different from the normal run-of-the-mill planning applications that the committee is used to. This is an application where the officers have put in place a provisional tree preservation order to preserve an oak tree to the front of number 57, The Chase in Thundersley. It's just over the back of the council offices. And the purpose of this evening is to determine whether to confirm the temporary provisional tree preservation order or whether to let it lapse. So I'll give you a quick run through. Back in January this year, planning permission was applied for the bungalow on this property here to have substantial works to it. And as part of that, we considered there to be a risk to the tree to the front, and there may be a desire to remove that tree. And we considered that, given its prominent corner plot location, you've got Tudor Close here, the Chase along here, that it performed a strong, sort of provided a strong amenity value to the wider street scene. And so, therefore, I believe it was the day after planning permission was granted for works to this property here, we issued a provisional tree preservation order, which provided 6 months of protection for this tree to give us the time to go away and assess the tree and undertake any additional assessments, consultations that are required. So you can see, if I go along here, this is a couple of screenshots from Google Street View. It's a fairly sizable oak tree. You've got on the left here, this is in April 2009, September 2016 in the middle, and then April 2021 over here. So it's a fairly large tree, and you can see over time it's got a little bit bigger, but it's largely stayed the same and has formed quite a prominent part of the street scene. Now, I believe it was in, let me find where it was, earlier this year, there was unauthorised works undertaken to the tree. It turns out this was by UK Power Networks, who had checked back in the previous September whether the tree was preserved, but hadn't checked closer to the time in the January when they were in, I think it was the February or March that they were doing the works. And so after eventually getting through speaking to them, we managed to stop the works at this stage. On the left, you can see this was just after they'd completed the works, and it had been what I can only describe as a very severe pollard of the tree. And so what has happened since is that the tree has sort of sprouted quite a significant amount of what's called epicormic growth, which can be seen on the right here. And that's where the tree's sort of gone into a bit of shock and gone, I need to sprout some leaves. Any bud has sprouted to try and get as much energy as possible, as it's trying to continue to survive from going from a very large oak tree to quite a small one. So that shows the comparison between the two. As part of the assessment, we undertake what's called a tempo assessment, which is a tree evaluation method for preservation orders assessment. This copies of these are appended to the report before you this evening, and these set out a numerical score that advises whether it's advisable implementing a TPO. And before the tree underwent these works, the tree scored very highly on that list. It scored 20 out of a possible 25, which shows it definitely merits a preservation order. Following the works, we undertook to take another tempo assessment because the tree is significantly different from when we initially issued it. And even though these works have been undertaken, it's still scored relatively highly given its location. And also there's the potential for the tree to continue to survive and grow and return to some semblance of what it once was. Granted, it will be different because of the work that have been undertaken, but nonetheless, it does have the potential to continue to survive. There has been some objections from the resident stated, and they've had a tree surgeon submit an objection to it with the findings of the tree surgeon that the tree should be removed in its entirety because there are pockets of decay in the tree. On my site visits to the site, when the works were being undertaken by UK Power Networks, none of the branches that I could see or that had been pointed out to me that I could see any signs of decay. We've also had the council's operational services manager, Ryan Lynch, who is a Lantry certified tree specialist, go out with myself, and his conclusions are also appended to the report. But he found that he has no concerns with the safety of the tree and would recommend that the tree is retained and maintained and allowed to recover from these severe works, and that there's regular monitoring in place to inspect for disease or decay as a result of the works that have been undertaken. So moving on, the options available this evening to members, because this item has been presented to the committee because there's been objections to the TPO. Where there are no objections to confirming a provisional TPO, under delegated powers officers can confirm these themselves. However, because there's been an objection, this is why it's been brought to you this evening. So the options available to this evening are to confirm the TPO, which is my recommendation this evening, and that requires that the owner, neighbours or any other bodies that need to undertake works need to seek permission for those works prior to them being carried out. The alternative is that the committee can decide not to confirm the order, and this means that on I believe it's the 17th of this month, the order will lapse, and that means that any works can be undertaken to the tree without consent. So the implications of that are that if in not confirming the order, there's the potential that the tree could be lost, although that's no guarantee. It could be retained. And then just to highlight to members, there is a small financial implication of the decision being made tonight insofar as there is the ongoing officer time if they do confirm the order for any tree preservation order applications that come forward, which are free for members of the public to make on preserved trees. However, there's obviously the officer time spent dealing with those in the future. So in conclusion, I consider that the tree still warrants protection even after these works, and there's a justified need and expediency to protecting the tree, and that therefore I consider that the tree should be protected and the provisional order confirmed. Thank you, Chairman.
We have a speaker here. That's Mr. Downs.
Thank you very much, sir.
If you would just walk over to the lectern. Thank you.
Is it on? Oh. Thank you, Stephen. Thanks for your comments. Good evening, everyone, ladies, gentlemen, Chairman. I'd like to start by saying all works carried out to this tree that is in such a state has nothing to do with me being the property owner. The reason the works were carried out is because all the cables, as you can see in the pictures, are going through the tree and causing distress and blackouts to the properties, especially when it rained. I love trees. We love trees. I never wanted to see this tree come down. But what it was a health and safety issue. I purchased a property with that beautiful oak tree, which was lovely. You've seen the photos of it. And now I'm left with that. After UK Power Networks said they was taking it right down to the stump, they've actually left me a monstrosity. Now, of course, I want the tree to grow back, but it's going to be another 200 years. I can't have that sitting there like that. Would you not agree as property owners? Would you have that? I haven't put a penny or handy one penny to pay for anything to be taken down off that tree. I haven't put anything forward. It was down to UK Power Networks, and they've left it like that when they said they was taking it right down. So, I know I've only got 3 minutes, but that's the honest truth. I've got people knocking on the door, dog walkers, the public saying, why have you left it like that? And it's not down to us. I haven't left it like that. I'm not even allowed to trim it up and smart it up. I can't touch it. So I suggest that, love it as much as I do, it's got to come down. And it's nothing to do with the property development. I can assure you of that. Because I'd love to put more trees in. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank
Downs. Before I move the recommendation, do members have any questions for the planning officers regarding this matter? Please note that this is a question section and members should refrain from making statements, and that should be expressed in the debate section of the meeting. Councillor Thornton.
Thank you. I assume that Power Networks were consulted on this, and have they given any comments as to whether or not it is dangerous? I mean, it does look like that would go completely through the tree as it was, and I do know what the effects of that sort of disturbance can be. So have they been consulted and have they commented?
UK Power Networks are now aware of the tree preservation order. They weren't initially, as I explained, that it is protected, and in having discussions with them and the contractors on site, it was sort of discussed that yes, it could cause a future problem to the trees, to the power lines, sorry. However, it doesn't necessarily prevent works from being undertaken to the tree, and quite often you'll drive along, and elsewhere along the chase, you'll see almost a right angle cut out of the tree's canopies to go around power lines. It doesn't prevent that. In fact, if we received a tree preservation order application to undertake such works, and from UK Power Networks, and the justification is there to say we need to clear them a certain distance clear of the power lines, it's not something that we would be objectionable to. It does have the potential to interfere with the power lines again. However, I would hazard that those power lines have been there less time than that tree has been there. So actually, in a sense, the power lines have been placed sort of insensitively to the tree. But part of it is also that trees grow and they're required to be maintained. They have to be kept within a certain, they're constricted by their growing environment. So in this instance, going forward, if the tree was to be preserved, I would recommend a scheme of management to prevent it growing too close to the power lines to prevent similar problems occurring again.
Councillor Barton-Brown.
I'm surprised that UK Power Networks would have basically culled a tree. They have not come and just trimmed this back. They have butchered something. Surely there's guidelines and rules and regulations around UK Power Networks to doing this kind of thing. Is this normal? This kind of sort of cull. Basically, surely there's guidance and guidelines that should prevent them from doing this.
Thank you.
So, yes, it is slightly unusual. In this instance, it's not something that I've come across elsewhere in the borough. In theory, if the tree wasn't preserved, it is entirely within their right. I believe they may have to liaise with the landowner. I'm not sure on the exact formalities, but they could fell a tree to remove it. As the public speaker said, they've had no involvement in this, and we don't dispute that. It is UK Power Networks that have undertaken these works. It's not them. So what originally, I mean, what could have happened is, depending on when we'd gone out, I could have gone out and there would have just been a stump there. It's just the matter of that we've managed to go out and save what we have so far. There are rules within the British standards, which I have spoken to Ryan Lynch about. This wasn't carried out in accordance with those British standards. However, in discussions with Ryan, that's because the tree wasn't intended to be pollarded from the start by UK Power Networks. If it had been, they would have made different cuts, would have left different branches on. However, because their intention was to fell the tree, they were sort of going at it and chopping the branches off. And so therefore, when I've stopped them, managed to get there and stop them, it's not been an ideal time for them to comply. It's too late to comply with the British standards that would normally be recommended. But unfortunately, that's the position we find ourselves in.
Councillor Lillis.
Thank you, Chair. And I think you've already sort of touched upon this, as did the homeowner. For me, the crux of the matter is that UK Power Network checked whether the lovely old tree, as it's referred to in the report, was preserved 6 months prior to carrying out the work. Page 9 of your report states that UK Power Network and their contractor have been advised by officers that they need to check if trees are preserved closer to the time of the actual works. So my question, and I've got to it at last, is can you, Stephen, be more specific? So is this new advice to UK Power Networks, or is it a reminder? How much closer to the actual works in terms of timescales? Is it legally enforceable? And what penalties do or will apply to stop this happening again in our borough? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lillis.
So there isn't any legal requirement to check closer to the time. However, typically within the borough, our experience is that where there are preserved trees and there's tree surgeons who are proposing to do works, they normally check a week or two before doing the works, maybe a month, up to a month. Are these trees protected at this address? And that's typically what we get. They'll email it in to us or our first contact team. They'll give the address and go, are there any protected trees at this property? If we go no, fine, they go ahead. And in this instance, however, sort of, I believe it was the end of September, beginning of October that they'd checked, and then it was the end of February that they were doing the work. So a considerable amount of time had passed between them. As I said, we can't enforce them to do that. However, we consider it to be good practice to check closer to the time. And that is what I've informed UK Power Networks and their contractor, that actually good practice in the interests of working with local authorities, not just us, all over the country, because they're a national grid or a national company and so are their contractors, that better practice going forward is to check closer to the time because things change. And so they need to take that into consideration in their practices.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Can I just ask, who is responsible for the upkeep and maintenance of this tree?
The tree's owner is responsible for the upkeep.
So
and
is it within
maintenance.
the property's boundary?
It's within the property's boundary of number
Right,
57
okay,
the
thank
Chase.
Councillor Skipp.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I mean, Councillor Sater's asked one of my questions about who is responsible for maintaining that tree. But in this instance, it was out of their control because the work was done without their permission. Do UK Power Networks have to seek permission from the landowner before they carry any works on the tree? And if that's the case, why did they not do so in this case?
I'm not sure if UK Power Networks are able to operate under their own areas of legislation. I'm not sure whether they would have had to ask the owner for their permission. However, if a tree is preserved, they would have to have seek the council's consent to do any work. So in this instance, if the tree was preserved going forwards, if UK Power Networks wanted to do any works to it, they would have to seek consent from the council.
Yeah, can I come back on that? Sorry, Chairman. Yeah, I do have some knowledge of it because I used to work in that industry. UK Power Networks have powers to to chop back trees to protect their power lines. But I would have thought this one went above and beyond that, what they've actually done to this tree, whether it had a TPO on it or not.
Yeah.
Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, my question's much the same. The officer has said the trimming back of the tree as it was starting to go through the power lines was the responsibility of the resident. I don't know if all residents know that that's their responsibility. That's a problem, because I've seen trees throughout the borough going through power lines, and different residents are just leaving it. They're just not doing anything. But the officer has said it is the responsibility of the resident. So that's interesting. Thank you.
So yeah, maintenance of trees within a property is the owner's responsibility. However, in these instances, quite a lot of instances, UK Power Networks will clear trees. That's why you quite often see them down there. The Chase is a really good example. You'll see almost a box section cut out of the tree canopy driving down sections of the Chase. So whilst it is maintenance is the landowner's responsibility, it's not uncommon for UK Power Networks, and there's other examples in the borough of them sort of cutting the right angle out of them to clear them away from their power lines, because it's in UK Power Networks' interest as well to protect their own equipment and utilities.
Councillor Raycott.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just check with the officer, looking at that photograph of the tree now with the kind of branches growing on it, can I confirm that there's been no disturbance of the roots or no chemicals have been put around the tree to make it die back? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm not aware of anything like that. As far as I'm aware, the only thing that's been undertaken to the tree is the works that you can see before you.
Councillor Gregg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could I just confirm that if the tree itself is retained, it would be the operations manager, Ryan Lynch, that would be going out to keep a check on it?
It wouldn't necessarily be just Ryan Lynch. It'd be potentially officers from the planning department. We quite often keep an eye on things as we drive around the borough. It would also be up to the landowner, for instance, if it became dangerous, because for instance, there's nothing to say that the tree couldn't develop issues with it. It couldn't deteriorate further in the future. If that was brought to our attention, we would go out and make an assessment. And at that point we would do that. But yeah, it's sort of on all parties, the landowner to keep an eye on it. We will certainly, driving by, have a look at it, keep an eye on how it's doing. And I'm sure, I know Ryan and the park rangers will also have a look at it as they pass by.
On that basis then, I mean, would it be you, or the planning department, that would, should anything happen to that tree, i.e. it gets diseased or something like that, make the determination that then it has to be felled?
That could be the case if, say, a couple of years' time came in and the tree, it seems to have bounced back at the moment. If it didn't continue that trend and it was really seriously suffering and it was starting to cause a problem, as detailed in my report, Ryan's done some tests and couldn't find any sort of structural defects in the lower base of the trunk. But if it came back and actually it starts to sound hollow, which then presents a danger to members of the public, if an application was put in and we've got that information backing it up, then if it has to come down for public safety, it has to come down. We were not going to say no, and just for the sake of it.
Thank you.
Councillor Howlett.
Do we have any idea of when that tree will regain some shape from what it is now?
It will take a good number of years for it to. I mean, at the moment, it's sprouted this epicormic growth to try and get some life back into it. As the upper crown begins to develop, it will start to shoot out sort of longer, spindly branches. Some of those can be quite brittle and snap. Others will continue, and I'm talking only sort of thin little branches. But then as the upper crown begins to develop a little bit more, the idea is that then it's got a larger crown, and the maintenance would be that you can start to remove, at that point you can start to remove the lower growth, which isn't good generally, because if you allow the lower growth, it will start sprouting branches all the way up it, and that'll interfere with, in this instance, the applicant's driveway, and also it'll leave you with a very odd looking tree. But the crown will take, it's not going to look anywhere near where it was before for a good many years. However, in a good few years, providing it maintains its sort of health, it will start to develop a form of crown. If you've seen examples of pollarded trees, they did some along Rayleigh Road, I think a couple of years ago, and more recently than that, you get an idea of how it sort of bushes out at the top.
As we seem to have asked quite a lot of questions, maybe we should move to the debate section, if there is indeed anything more to be said. The planning officer's recommendation is that the TPO be confirmed, subject obviously to conditions. Would anyone else like to speak? For the purposes of debate, I move the recommendation. Councillor Skipp.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Although I sympathise with the landowners' view regarding this tree, as it seems to be, it's still a viable tree and could be into the future. We understand that we are going to monitor this regularly, and for any changes, I'm happy to support the officer's recommendation to grant the TPO.
Thank you, Councillor Skipp. Councillor Barton-Brown.
I think TPOs are hugely important to our residents and our local area, and the reason why they're put in is to preserve good trees like this. I mean, you can see the one further down the road in the background. It's absolutely huge. I sympathise with the owners that have these trees on their land, but you are buying properties knowing you have these trees to look after. TPOs are TPOs, they're put in place for a reason, and I think if we don't stand by them and stand up to them, will we get more instances of trees being felled unnecessarily and people getting away with it? I think UK power networks have had a shocker, if I'm being honest with you. As Stephen said, down this particular road, they've clearly cut out oak trees around the lines to allow them to grow, completely culling, which looked like a perfectly beautiful tree. It's not on, in my opinion, so I think we need to stand by these TPOs and why we put them in place and protect them for our street scene and our residents.
Thank you, Councillor Barton-Brown. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. I'd agree with everything that my colleague, Mrs. Barton-Brown, has just said. I mean, this is a street scene that you're going to see throughout our borough. Driving here, you know, I've travelled up Essex Way, Benfleet Road, and through to the council premises here. I think we need to send a very strong signal out to UK Power Networks that what they've done here is really not on. And I do sympathise with the landowner or the homeowner. It's not nice, but you know, we've got to look after our trees, and what's happened here is abhorrent in my view. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? The Planning Officer's recommendation is that the TPO is confirmed. The motion before you is for confirmation. May I have a show of hands, please? Those for the motion.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's unanimous.
That's unanimous. For this evening, thank you for attending and good evening.